Hey guys, tonight we begin a journey into a world both fierce and fascinating, a world shaped by ice, sea and steel, the Viking Age, a time when the roar of battle mixed with the quiet intensity of games played not just for fun but for honor, survival, and sometimes deadly consequence. As you settle in, maybe dim the lights, let the gentle hum of a fan or a quiet breeze fill the room, and take a slow breath in and out. This is not a tale of grand victories or famous kings, but of the strange, shadowy contests that tested the bodies and minds of those ancient Norsemen. So before we dive deeper, if you enjoy these calm, detailed explorations of history's lesser-known corners, consider liking and subscribing, but only if it feels right to you. And I'd love to hear where you're tuning in from tonight, what time it is in your part of the world. It's always a quiet thrill to know who is here on this journey. Now, let's ease into the first part of our story, setting the scene for the deadly games of the Vikings, a world where sport and survival walked hand in hand. The Viking Age, stretching roughly from the late 8th century through the mid-11th century, stands as one of the most dynamic and storied periods in Northern European history. It was a time defined by the restless movement of people across seas and landscapes, by the forging of new trade routes, and by a culture steeped in warfare, exploration and profound ritualistic observance. The men and women of this era lived in societies marked by both brutality and intricate social order, where honor and reputation were currencies as vital as silver or land. In the midst of such a world, games and competitions had emerged not simply as a form of amusement, but as integral threads woven deeply into the fabric of Viking life. At its core, the Viking Age was shaped by a world where survival depended on strength, skill, and cunning. From the fjords of Norway to the forests of Sweden and the windswept coasts of Denmark, the Norse peoples lived in relatively small communities, often defined by kinship ties and a shared mythology. Yet, beyond their roles as farmers, traders, and raiders, Vikings cultivated a culture that embraced competition in many forms: physical, intellectual, and ritualistic. These competitions were more than mere pastime. They were venues for demonstrating prowess, asserting social standing, and even resolving disputes. The games held at communal gatherings were occasions when individuals could enhance their reputations or face lasting shame, moments that mirrored the broader struggles for power and respect in Viking society. Viking society was permeated by a belief system that saw the world as a tapestry of interconnected forces, where gods and fate played significant roles. The Norse pantheon, with figures such as Odin, Thor and Freyja, embodied ideals of strength, wisdom and honor, ideals that the Vikings sought to emulate through their actions, including in their competitive endeavors. The games were often perceived as reflections of these cosmic struggles, arenas where mortal skill could echo divine contests. For instance, the mental acuity demanded by board games such as Hnefatafl was seen not merely as recreation, but as a practice in strategy and foresight, virtues highly prized in war and leadership. In the great gatherings known as Things, where legal decisions were made and disputes settled, games and contests formed an essential social component. These assemblies were more than political forums. They were the heart of community life, spaces where social bonds were reinforced through shared experiences. Here, games could range from wrestling matches that tested raw physical strength to elaborate contests of weapon skill, such as axe throwing or swordplay exhibitions. The outcomes of these contests could carry significant weight, influencing the perceptions of peers and the distribution of honor. They also served as training grounds for the young, preparing future warriors for the rigors of battle and the unpredictable nature of Viking expeditions. The setting of these games was often outdoors, in fields or by longhouses, where the sound of cheering or grunts of exertion mingled with the rustle of wind and the cry of seabirds. The atmosphere was both communal and intense, a mixture of celebration and seriousness. Unlike modern sports which often emphasize entertainment alone, Viking games were tightly bound to the social order. They allowed individuals to express their identities and fulfill roles within their communities, whether as skilled fighters, wise strategists, or formidable competitors. The dual nature of these games, pleasurable yet deadly, entertaining yet meaningful, captures the complexity of the Viking worldview. Understanding the Viking approach to games also requires appreciating the harshness of their environment. Life in Scandinavia during this era was often precarious, with limited resources, harsh winters, and threats both from rival groups and nature itself. In such a world, physical strength and mental resilience were paramount. Games, therefore, were more than leisure. They were vital exercises in endurance, skill, and preparation for survival. Whether in the grip of a wrestling match or the focused mind needed for a board game, participants practiced the very qualities that would carry them through raids, voyages, and battles. In this context, the Viking games can be seen as microcosms of their society's values and struggles. They reflected the harsh realities of a world where strength could mean the difference between life and death, and where social bonds and reputation could determine one's fate. The intertwining of play, ritual, and survival created a unique cultural expression that continues to fascinate historians and enthusiasts alike. As the story of Viking games unfolds, it will reveal how these contests were not mere diversions but essential elements of a society balanced delicately between order and chaos, peace and violence, community and individual ambition. From the intricate strategies of board games to the brutal physicality of wrestling and combat sports, each form of competition tells a story of a people shaped by their environment, their beliefs, and their relentless quest for honor. This understanding of the Viking Age and the cultural context of games naturally leads to an examination of the social structures that shaped who played, how they played, and what stakes were involved. The games reflected the broader hierarchy of Viking society and played a role in reinforcing or challenging that order. The next chapter explores the intricate layers of Viking social organization and the place of games within this complex web of relationships. The Viking Age was a society carefully stratified by status and duty, where social roles were clearly defined yet permeable through actions such as feats of strength, skill, and honor, displayed in games and competitions. To understand how deeply woven games were into Viking life, it is essential to explore the social hierarchy that shaped every aspect of existence, where the distinctions between jarls, carls, and thralls influenced not only everyday life, but also who could participate in which contests and what those contests meant. At the top of Viking society stood the jarls, the noble elite, landowners who held power and wealth. They were the chieftains, leaders in battle and law, men who wielded authority over territories and communities. The jarls embodied the warrior aristocrat ideal, and their status was both inherited and earned through deeds. For jarls, games were arenas not just for amusement, but for demonstrating leadership, physical prowess, and tactical wisdom. Participating in contests allowed them to display qualities essential for maintaining their position: courage, honor, and skill. The outcomes of these contests affected not only personal prestige, but also the respect commanded by their followers and peers. Below the jarls were the carls, the freemen and farmers who formed the backbone of Viking communities. Carls were neither slaves nor nobility but possessed enough independence to own land and weapons. They took part in the daily life of the village, from farming and crafting to raiding and trading. The role of games for carls was multifaceted. Games were a means of bonding within the community, a source of entertainment, and a way to prove one's worth in a society where respect could be earned through visible strength and competence. Physical contests and games allowed carls to engage in healthy competition with peers, settling rivalries and forging alliances. Success in these games could elevate a carl's social standing and even open paths to greater responsibilities. At the bottom of the social ladder were the thralls, the enslaved people captured in raids or born into servitude. Thralls had no legal rights and were considered property. Yet even within this lowest class, the dynamics of competition played a subtle role. While thralls rarely participated in the formal games held by free men, evidence suggests that informal contests among thralls existed, sometimes as expressions of resistance or survival. Moreover, the physical skills displayed by thralls in labor, endurance, and strength contributed indirectly to the social fabric and the functioning of Viking society as a whole. The games and contests themselves mirrored and reinforced these social distinctions. For instance, highly formalized competitions often occurred during public gatherings such as the Thing, where social order was on full display. Here jarls might preside over events, sponsoring games that showcased their power and generosity. The contests were not merely sport, They were social rituals where the values of honor and reputation were enacted and observed. A Jarl winning a wrestling match or axe-throwing contest reaffirmed his dominance, while a Carl's victory over another could increase his standing within the local community. Moreover, the participation in and observation of games served to knit the social fabric tighter. These gatherings and contests offered rare occasions when the rigid lines of hierarchy could be tested and even blurred. A Carl demonstrating exceptional skill or courage might be recognized by a Jarl, potentially gaining patronage or a place among the warrior elite. Games also functioned as a form of social currency, where alliances were built, disputes eased, and friendships forged through shared experience. The atmosphere was competitive but bound by unwritten codes of conduct emphasizing respect and fairness. This structured yet fluid interaction within games was also reflective of the Viking value system, where individual honor was paramount but tied intrinsically to community standing. Victory in a game was not simply a personal achievement, but a contribution to the family's or clan's honor. Defeat, conversely, could bring shame, affecting one's social relationships and future prospects. Because Viking society was predominantly oral and reputation-based, the outcomes of games and competitions carried long-lasting weight in storytelling, memory, and reputation. Games also served a legal function within the social order. The thing itself was a legislative and judicial assembly, and alongside the business of law and governance, games provided a means to resolve tensions. Sometimes contests were used to settle disputes, with combat or athletic challenges substituting or complementing legal decisions. This integration of games into law and society further underlined their importance beyond entertainment. They were embedded into the mechanisms that maintained order. Women's roles within this social hierarchy also influenced their participation in games, though generally more restricted than men's. While Jarls and Carls were active in physical contests, women's involvement often centered on less physically dangerous games, such as board games or contests of skill and wit. Yet, women could command respect through such competitions, and there is evidence that some women engaged in physical contests, particularly in ritual or exceptional contexts. The interplay of class, gender, and competition created a complex tapestry in which games were both reflective and constitutive of Viking social life. As these contests unfolded in communal settings, they became a medium for expressing identity, negotiating power, and reinforcing societal norms. They encapsulated the values of bravery, skill, and honor that underpinned the Viking way of life. In understanding this social context, the next step is to delve deeper into the religious and ritualistic underpinnings of these competitions. Norse mythology and spirituality imbued Viking life with meaning and purpose, and these beliefs shaped not only what games were played, but how they were perceived. The next part will explore how games were sanctified through religion, connecting mortal contests to divine will and cosmic order. The world of the Vikings was not one governed solely by earthly concerns of survival, honor, and social hierarchy. Deeply interwoven with their daily lives was a spiritual realm filled with gods, spirits, and a complex cosmology that shaped how the Norse people understood their existence. Among the many ways this spiritual fabric expressed itself was through their games and competitions, physical contests that were far more than mere sport. These activities were suffused with religious and ritualistic significance, perceived as a form of communication with the divine, a test of favor from the gods, and a reflection of fate itself. Understanding this sacred dimension of Viking games reveals the profound cultural importance that physical contests held in Norse society, a significance that transcended entertainment and touched the very core of their worldview. Central to the Viking cosmology was the belief in a pantheon of gods who embodied various aspects of life and death, power and wisdom. Odin, the Allfather, was the god of war, wisdom, and magic, revered as the patron of warriors and kings. Thor, the thunder god, was the embodiment of strength and protection, wielding his mighty hammer Mjolnir against chaos and giants. Freyja, associated with fertility and battle, also played a role in deciding who lived and who died in conflict. These deities were not distant or abstract. They were active agents in the lives of mortals, shaping fate, inspiring courage, and judging the worthiness of individuals. The Vikings believed that through their actions, whether in battle or competition, they could earn the favor of these gods or suffer their wrath. Games and competitions were thus understood as extensions of these divine interactions. Physical contests were arenas, where mortal strength and skill could align with or oppose the will of the gods. Victory was seen not merely as the result of personal ability or effort, but as a sign of divine approval or destiny. The concept of word, roughly translated as fate, was fundamental here. Fate was not a fixed, unchangeable decree, but a dynamic force intertwined with honor and destiny. By participating in games, Vikings could actively engage with their word, demonstrating bravery and strength that might alter their path or solidify their legacy. Rituals often accompanied these games, underscoring their sacred nature. Before contests, participants might perform specific rites to invoke protection or favor. Such rituals could include offerings to the gods, recitation of prayers or runes, or symbolic gestures meant to align the competitors with cosmic forces. The very spaces where games were held, open fields, sacred groves, or near temples, were chosen for their spiritual significance, further blurring the line between the secular and the sacred. Norse sagas and historical records provide glimpses into how these religious beliefs shaped the conduct and interpretation of competitions. For instance, some accounts describe warriors dedicating their victories to Odin, acknowledging that success was a gift from the Allfather. The heroic ethos celebrated in Viking culture emphasized that glory in battle or sport was a path to Valhalla, Odin's hall, where fallen warriors would feast and prepare for the final apocalyptic battle of Ragnarok. Even in games, this ideal infused action with a weight beyond the immediate, connecting competitors to a cosmic narrative of honor, sacrifice, and eternal reward. The gods themselves were often invoked metaphorically in the nature of competitions. The strength and ferocity of Thor inspired contests of brute force, such as wrestling or stone lifting, where competitors sought to emulate the thunder god's overwhelming power. Meanwhile, the cunning and wisdom associated with Odin could be seen in strategic games like Hnefatafl, where mental acuity and foresight were paramount. These dual aspects, strength and wisdom, were not seen as contradictory but complementary virtues essential to the Viking ideal. The sacredness of these contests was also reflected in the consequences of victory and defeat. To win was to receive not only social honor, but a spiritual affirmation, a sign that one was chosen by the gods or blessed by fate. To lose, particularly in deadly competitions or duels, could mean dishonor or even death, but it also carried a spiritual significance. A warrior who fell honorably in competition might be destined for the afterlife's halls of the brave, while cowardice or failure could lead to social and spiritual ruin. This intertwining of physical and metaphysical stakes heightened the seriousness with which Vikings approached their games. Moreover, the ritualistic nature of competitions helped reinforce communal bonds. The shared experience of witnessing or participating in these sacred contests created moments of collective meaning, where the community acknowledged the presence of divine forces and the operation of fate. These events were not just personal tests but collective ceremonies that reaffirmed cultural values and social cohesion. The communal aspect of ritualized games allowed participants and spectators alike to feel connected to the larger spiritual order. Seasonal festivals and holy days often featured these competitions as part of their observances. The cycles of nature, with their rhythms of birth, death, and renewal, were mirrored in the contests. Festivals honoring gods like Thor or Odin included wrestling matches, combat displays, and athletic challenges, all of which served to reenact mythic themes of struggle and triumph. These games were a means for the Vikings to participate in the cosmic drama, to place themselves within the cycles of existence, and to seek favor for the coming seasons. In addition to the gods, spirits and supernatural beings played roles in the religious understanding of competitions. The Vikings believed in land spirits, ancestral ghosts, and other entities that could influence outcomes or offer protection. This belief contributed to the atmosphere of reverence and caution surrounding games. Participants might take care to respect these unseen forces, ensuring that their actions aligned with both divine and earthly expectations. The religious and ritualistic dimensions of Viking competitions highlight a worldview where every action carried multiple layers of meaning. Games were not frivolous but deeply serious acts embedded in a cosmology that connected the physical world to the spiritual. They were moments when the boundary between mortal and divine could be crossed, when fate was actively engaged, and when the values of courage, honor, and wisdom were enacted in tangible form. As these sacred contests unfolded within the complex social structures of Viking society, they also demanded a level of preparation and training that extended beyond the physical. The next part will explore how Vikings prepared their bodies and minds for the challenges of games and battle alike, cultivating skills that were essential both on the playing field and the battlefield. The life of a Viking was one shaped by constant preparation and endurance, where from the earliest years the young were gradually introduced to a world demanding both physical prowess and mental acuity. In a society where survival depended heavily on one's ability to fight, navigate treacherous seas, and outthink opponents, the process of preparation for competition, whether in battle or in the games that mirrored it, was a lifelong commitment. This preparation began in childhood, weaving together the training of body and mind into a comprehensive regimen designed to forge the warriors and leaders of tomorrow. From the first moments of childhood, Viking boys were immersed in an environment where physical activity was not optional but essential. Their daily routines involved activities that strengthened their bodies, running through forests, climbing trees, lifting heavy objects, and wrestling with peers. These exercises were not merely play, they were deliberate efforts to build stamina, strength, and coordination. By engaging with the natural world, children developed agility and resilience, qualities vital for the rigors of Viking life. The harsh northern climate, with its long winters and unpredictable weather, further toughened young bodies, conditioning them for the demands ahead. Mental preparation accompanied this physical training. The Vikings valued not only brute strength but also intelligence and strategy. Storytelling and oral tradition played a significant role in this mental cultivation. From an early age, children learned the sagas and myths of their people, tales filled with heroes, gods, and battles that were both inspiring and instructive. These stories taught lessons of bravery, cunning, and honor, providing mental frameworks that shaped how young Vikings approached challenges. The importance of memory, quick thinking, and strategic planning was embedded in the culture, reflected not only in their stories but in their games and contests. Formalized training often began as boys reached adolescence. Under the guidance of elders or skilled warriors, they learned the use of weapons, axes, swords, spears, and the techniques of combat. This training was both practical and ritualistic, encompassing drills, mock battles, and competitive sparring. The purpose was not only to master the physical skills necessary for warfare but to cultivate the mindset of a warrior, discipline, focus, and a readiness to face danger without hesitation. These sessions often doubled as games or contests themselves, blurring the lines between training and competition, and reinforcing skills through repeated practice in challenging circumstances. Endurance was a particular focus, as Vikings faced not only the violence of battle but also the physical hardships of travel and harsh living conditions. Running long distances, swimming in cold waters, and carrying heavy loads were common elements of preparation. Such endurance exercises built the stamina required for Viking raids and explorations, where warriors might endure days of marching or sea travel with limited rest. Games that tested endurance, such as long-distance running or swimming contests, were popular both for training purposes and as social competitions during festivals. Mental toughness was cultivated alongside physical endurance. The Vikings prized stoicism, the ability to endure pain, hardship, and uncertainty without complaint. This quality was essential in games that could be both physically punishing and psychologically demanding. Contests like wrestling or axe throwing required not only strength and skill, but calm concentration under pressure. Mental preparation included learning to control fear, maintain composure, and anticipate opponents' moves. Such skills were honed through repeated participation in games, which provided a controlled environment in which to practice these vital traits. Strategic games also played a role in mental preparation. Board games such as Hnefatafl were more than entertainment. They were exercises in tactics, deception, and planning. Mastery of such games was considered a sign of intelligence and wisdom, traits highly valued in Viking leaders. The ability to think several moves ahead, to anticipate an opponent's strategy, was directly transferable to battlefield command and decision-making. Young Vikings who excelled in these games earned respect and often took on advisory roles in their communities. The integration of physical and mental training created a holistic approach to preparation. Vikings understood that strength without strategy was insufficient, and intellect without physical capability was dangerous. Their games and competitions reflected this balance, testing both aspects in ways that prepared participants for the multifaceted demands of their world. This training began in youth but continued throughout life, as Viking men and women alike maintained physical conditioning and mental sharpness in anticipation of both everyday challenges and moments of competition. The communal nature of this preparation was also significant. Training in games often took place in groups, fostering camaraderie and competition simultaneously. Young Vikings learned not only from mentors but also from peers, developing social bonds that would carry into adulthood and into the ranks of warriors. This collective aspect reinforced social structures and shared values as participants pushed each other to greater heights while respecting the unspoken codes governing competition. Women too participated in physical training, though their roles differed somewhat from those of men. Evidence suggests that Viking women engaged in running, swimming, and wrestling, activities that built the strength necessary for managing households, farms, and in some cases defending their homes. Mental preparation for women often involved mastery of domestic skills and social diplomacy, but physical conditioning was also valued. The participation of women in such training underscored the Viking ideal of resilience and adaptability across genders. This lifelong process of preparation culminated in the festivals and gatherings where games and competitions took place. Here the skills honed over years were tested publicly, offering opportunities to demonstrate ability, gain honor, and prepare for future challenges. The games were simultaneously celebrations and serious contests, blending the joy of competition with the gravity of social and spiritual stakes. The physical and mental preparation of Vikings thus formed the foundation for the deadly games that marked their culture. These games were not isolated events but the result of years of cultivation, practice, and discipline. Understanding this preparation provides insight into why these contests were so intense, meaningful, and sometimes lethal, as participants brought to the field the full weight of their training and ambition. From this foundation of preparation, the story naturally leads to the settings where these games were held, the communal festivals, assemblies, and things where the social, spiritual, and competitive dimensions of Viking life converged in a complex dance of tradition and spectacle. The next chapter will explore the significance of these gatherings as the stage for deadly Viking games. In the Viking world, the boundaries between law, community, and celebration were fluid and deeply intertwined, most clearly exemplified in the institution known as the Thing. These gatherings, held regularly in various communities across Scandinavia and Viking settlements abroad, served as multifaceted assemblies where legal disputes were resolved, decisions made, social ties strengthened, and crucially, where recreational activities including deadly games were conducted. To understand the cultural significance of Viking competitions, one must first immerse in the atmosphere and structure of these things and festivals, for they were the crucible in which social order, entertainment, and ritual converged. A thing was fundamentally a public assembly, a meeting of free men who gathered to deliberate on matters of law, settle conflicts, and establish communal policies. These gatherings could be local, regional, or even national in scope, depending on the size and power of the Viking community. At the heart of each thing was the exercise of communal governance. Chieftains, elders, and legal experts presided over discussions, issued judgments, and upheld customary laws. However, beyond these formal functions, the thing was also a social occasion of great importance, a time when people from surrounding areas came together to interact, trade goods, and participate in shared rituals. The timing of things was often seasonal, coinciding with natural cycles such as the arrival of spring or the harvest, periods when travel was more feasible, and communities had more leisure time. These seasonal markers imbued the gatherings with a rhythm that connected human affairs to the broader natural and cosmic order. The convergence of lawmaking, socializing and celebration during things created a dynamic environment where various forms of interaction could take place simultaneously. Among these, games and competitions were prominent, serving both as entertainment and as vital expressions of social values. Deadly games found a natural home within these communal events, where the intensity of competition was heightened by the presence of large audiences and the weight of social expectation. Wrestling matches, axe-throwing contests, and other physical challenges took place alongside more peaceful games, attracting participants and spectators from different social strata. The thing provided a rare opportunity for individuals to demonstrate their prowess publicly, gaining or losing honor in the eyes of their peers. The communal setting magnified the stakes of these contests, transforming them into social rituals with real consequences. The spaces where things and festivals occurred were carefully chosen, often open fields, hilltops or clearings near waterways, accessible and symbolic. The location itself carried significance, sometimes considered sacred or linked to ancestral traditions. The environment lent a particular atmosphere to the games held there. The open air, the sounds of nature, mingling with the crowd's murmur, the sight of raised weapons and trained bodies moving with precision. This setting reinforced the connection between the participants, the community, and the natural world, underscoring the belief that these contests were more than mere sport. They were acts embedded in a web of cultural meaning. Trade and feasting were integral components of these gatherings, creating an atmosphere of celebration and abundance. Alongside the legal and recreational activities, merchants displayed goods, food was prepared and shared, and people from various regions mingled. This festive environment provided a backdrop for the games, which often culminated in dramatic displays of skill and endurance. The feasts following competitions served to honor victors, cement alliances, and renew community bonds. In this way, the games and their social context were inseparable, each amplifying the other. The thing was also a place where stories and reputations were made and spread. Winners of competitions were celebrated, not only in the moment, but remembered in oral traditions that preserved their deeds for generations. This storytelling reinforced communal values and linked present participants with their ancestors, creating a continuous cultural lineage. The communal witness to games and competitions ensured that individual achievements became part of a collective memory, reinforcing social cohesion and shared identity. Within these gatherings, the line between play and serious contest was often blurred. Many games, while entertaining, carried the risk of injury or death. The deadly nature of some competitions reflected the martial culture of the Vikings, where combat skill was essential and the boundary between sport and battle was thin. These contests served as both training and proof of readiness for the violence that could erupt at any time. The public setting of the thing ensured that such displays were recognized, regulated by social norms, and infused with ritual significance. Participation in games at things was also a means of social negotiation. Through competition, individuals could assert or challenge status, settle personal disputes, or build alliances. The outcomes of contests affected relationships and power dynamics within the community, making these gatherings vital to the political and social life of the Vikings. The thing, therefore, was not only a legislative and judicial institution, but also a cultural theatre where identity and power were performed and negotiated through games. In some cases, these public assemblies included more formalized and structured competitions, sponsored by powerful leaders seeking to display generosity and command loyalty. These sponsored games could be elaborate affairs, drawing competitors from wide areas, and featuring prizes or honors that enhanced social prestige. Such events underscored the connection between political power and cultural patronage in Viking society, where hosting or sponsoring games was itself an assertion of status. Women, while often less visible in formal things, also played roles in these gatherings, participating in some contests or in organizing feasts and ceremonies that surrounded the games. Their presence and actions contributed to the social fabric of these communal events, ensuring that things were holistic cultural occasions encompassing law, recreation, ritual, and community. The social and ceremonial complexity of the thing set the stage for the many types of Viking games and competitions, from the relatively peaceful strategic contests played indoors to the physically demanding and sometimes deadly outdoor matches. These gatherings provided the context in which games could flourish as both cultural expressions and practical exercises. As the Viking games took place within the rich social tapestry of festivals and things, their forms were varied and diverse. To understand the full range of these competitions and their meanings, one must look more closely at the specific types of games Vikings played: physical contests, strategic board games, and violent sports, each reflecting different facets of Viking culture and values. The next section will delve into this diversity, exploring the range of games that filled Viking gatherings with competition and spectacle. The Viking Age was marked not only by fierce battles and expansive voyages, but also by a rich variety of games and competitions that reflected the multifaceted nature of Norse culture. These games ranged from contemplative board contests demanding strategic thought, to physical contests that tested strength and endurance, and even extended to more violent competitions blurring the line between sport and combat. Understanding the diversity of Viking games offers insight into the values, skills, and social functions these contests served within their society. At one end of this spectrum were strategy games, among which the most famous was Hnefatafl, often described as Viking chess. Hnefatafl was played on a checkered board with asymmetrical sides. One player commanded a king and his defenders, while the other controlled attackers seeking to capture the king. The game required careful planning, tactical foresight, and an ability to anticipate an opponent's moves, qualities essential not only in the game itself, but in Viking warfare and leadership. Unlike chess, which evolved later and became widespread in Europe, Hnefatafl mirrored the realities of battlefield dynamics, with its uneven forces and focus on defense and escape. Archaeological finds across Scandinavia and Viking settlements in the British Isles have unearthed Hnefatafl boards and pieces carved from bone, wood, and stone, underscoring its popularity and cultural significance. Alongside these cerebral contests were a variety of physical games and competitions that tested the body's limits. Wrestling was one of the most common and esteemed physical contests, offering a controlled yet fierce way to display strength, skill, and endurance. Wrestling matches could be intense, involving grappling techniques designed to overpower or throw the opponent. Unlike modern wrestling, Viking wrestling carried a rawness born from the culture's emphasis on combat readiness. It was not only sport, but preparation for hand-to-hand combat, where quick reflexes and physical dominance could mean survival. The respect earned by skilled wrestlers extended beyond the games, often influencing their social standing and reputation. Axe throwing was another popular form of competition, combining skill, precision, and danger. Vikings were famed for their mastery of the axe, both as a tool and a weapon, and contests involving throwing axes at targets tested participants' accuracy and control. These games served dual purposes, honing combat skills vital for raiding and warfare, and providing thrilling spectacles for spectators. Similarly, knife fighting and other weapon-based competitions allowed Vikings to demonstrate martial prowess in less lethal, yet highly competitive, formats. Among the more chaotic and violent games was Knattleikr, an ancient ball game whose exact rules remain somewhat obscure but which is described in saga literature as a rough and often dangerous sport. Played with a hard ball and curved sticks, Knattleikr combined elements reminiscent of hockey and rugby. It involved teams competing aggressively to strike or carry the ball across opposing lines, frequently resulting in injuries. The game's physicality and potential for violence reflected the Viking appetite for contests that pushed limits and tested toughness. Though Knattleikr was a game, it was also an expression of the martial culture, providing a venue for controlled but intense physical conflict. Horse racing and equestrian competitions also played a role in Viking games. Horses were highly valued in Norse society, not only as means of transportation but as symbols of status and power. Racing and riding contests tested speed, endurance, and horsemanship, skills critical for warriors who depended on horses in battle and travel. These competitions were exciting spectacles that brought communities together in celebration and rivalry, blending athleticism with social display. Feats of strength and endurance featured heavily in Viking competitions. Lifting heavy stones, running long distances, and endurance swimming were common challenges that demonstrated physical capability and stamina. These tests were not merely for show, they connected to the practical demands of Viking life, where strength could mean survival in battle or harsh environmental conditions. Moreover, such feats were closely tied to status. Lifting the heaviest stone or running the farthest could elevate an individual's prestige and reinforce communal values of resilience and fortitude. Some Viking games involved blood sports such as boar and bear baiting. Though cruel by modern standards, these contests were socially accepted forms of entertainment that also carried ritualistic significance. They tested courage and dominance, qualities highly esteemed in Viking culture. The dangers faced by both animals and humans in these events echoed the Viking acceptance of risk and confrontation with death, reinforcing the cultural celebration of bravery. Beyond the physical and strategic, Vikings also engaged in more peaceful games such as dice and other chance-based games, often played indoors around the hearth. These games offered social interaction and relaxation during the long, dark winters, providing balance to the physical intensity of outdoor competitions. Such games were often imbued with superstition and ritual, with players seeking luck or divine favor in their throws. The diversity of Viking games thus mirrored the complexity of their society, combining intellect, strength, chance, and risk in ways that reflected broader cultural values. These contests were occasions for individuals to demonstrate skill, gain honor, and negotiate social standing, all while reinforcing communal bonds. Games were deeply integrated into the rhythms of Viking life, appearing in festivals, gatherings, and informal settings alike. This range of games also highlights the Viking understanding of competition as a means of preparation. Physical contests sharpened bodies for the demands of war and survival, while strategic games trained the mind for leadership and tactical decision-making. Together, they formed a comprehensive system of development that prepared individuals for the challenges of their turbulent world. The exploration of Viking games naturally leads to a closer examination of one of the most iconic and widespread of these contests, the strategic board game Hnefatafl. This game, with its intricate rules and symbolic meaning, offers a window into the Viking mind and their conception of warfare and strategy. The next chapter will delve into the origins, rules, and cultural significance of Hnefatafl. The ancient Viking board game known as Hnefatafl occupies a unique place in the cultural and intellectual history of the Norse people. Unlike many games that survive only in fragmentary references, Hnefatafl is well documented through archaeological finds, saga literature, and scholarly reconstructions, allowing modern observers a window into the strategic mind and martial culture of the Vikings. Far from being a mere pastime, Hnefatafl embodied the tactical challenges and social dynamics of warfare and leadership that were central to Viking society. Its rules, symbolism, and enduring popularity reflect a deep connection between play and the realities of the battlefield. Hnefatafl, often translated as King's Table or King's Game, was played on a checkered board of varying sizes, most commonly 11x11 or 13x13 squares. The game was asymmetrical, involving two opposing sides with different objectives and numbers of pieces. One side controlled a king and a small group of defenders, placed in the center of the board, while the opposing side commanded a larger force of attackers aiming to capture the king. The defender's goal was to help the king escape to the edges or corners of the board, while the attackers sought to trap and capture him. This dynamic setup created a tense strategic contest mirroring the real-world situation of a besieged leader attempting to break free from encirclement. The rules of Hnefatafl demanded careful planning, anticipation, and tactical flexibility. Players moved their pieces orthogonally, up, down, left or right, across the board, with the capacity to capture opposing pieces by surrounding them on two sides. The king piece was typically larger or more ornate, underscoring its importance. Victory depended not only on individual moves, but on a broader strategic vision, understanding how to defend, deceive, and exploit weaknesses in the opponent's formation. This level of complexity made Hnefatafl a game that required not just chance but skillful foresight, reflecting values esteemed by Viking leaders. Archaeological evidence of Hnefatafl has been found throughout Scandinavia and Viking settlements abroad, including in England, Ireland, and even Iceland. Boards and pieces have been crafted from bone, antler, wood, and stone, often intricately carved and decorated, suggesting that the game was valued both for its intellectual challenge and its aesthetic qualities. Some finds indicate that Hnefatafl was played by people across social classes, from commoners to nobles, further emphasizing its widespread cultural significance. The symbolic meaning of Hnefatafl extended beyond the board itself. The central position of the king and the struggle of the defenders to protect him encapsulated the importance of leadership and loyalty in Viking society. The attackers, with their greater numbers and need to coordinate effectively, represented the external threats and challenges faced by leaders and their communities. The game was a metaphor for the constant tension between defense and aggression, order and chaos, survival and conquest. This symbolism resonated strongly with the lived experience of Vikings, who often faced sieges, raids and battles in which leadership decisions could determine life or death. The game provided a mental rehearsal of these struggles, allowing players to engage with concepts of strategy, risk, and sacrifice in a controlled setting. Mastery of Hnefatafl was seen as an indication of wisdom and tactical acumen, traits prized in warriors and chieftains alike. Historical texts and sagas often mention games such as Hnefatafl in contexts that highlight their social and cultural roles. For example, in the Icelandic sagas, leaders and warriors are sometimes depicted playing board games during times of respite from battle, using the time to sharpen their minds and plan future campaigns. These accounts show that Hnefatafl was not merely entertainment but part of a broader system of martial preparation and social interaction. The game's enduring popularity and the variety of regional rule variations also point to its adaptability and cultural resonance. Different Viking communities might have modified rules or board sizes, tailoring the game to local preferences or symbolic needs. This fluidity highlights how Hnefatafl was embedded in a living tradition, evolving alongside the people who played it. Beyond its historical context, Hnefatafl's design and gameplay continue to attract interest today, inspiring modern recreations and tournaments. Scholars and enthusiasts appreciate its elegant mechanics and the window it offers into Viking strategic thinking. The game's balance of offense and defense, asymmetric forces, and the emphasis on protecting a central figure distinguish it from many other ancient board games, underscoring the unique worldview of its creators. The examination of Hnefatafl opens the door to a broader understanding of how the Vikings integrated intellectual challenge with physical competition. While board games tested mental skills, other contests demanded bodily strength and endurance. Wrestling, axe throwing, and combat sports formed an essential complement to strategic games, each reinforcing different aspects of the Viking ideal. The next part will turn to the physically demanding contests, exploring how wrestling and other forms of hand-to-hand combat were practiced, celebrated, and sometimes fatal in Viking society. These contests embodied the raw power and martial spirit that were as central to Viking identity as the intellectual prowess displayed in games like Hnefatafl. Wrestling, a timeless contest of strength, skill, and endurance, held a special place within Viking culture, intertwining physical prowess with social recognition and communal values. In the harsh and demanding world of the Norse people, where survival was often contingent upon combat ability and mental toughness, wrestling was more than a simple game or sport. It was a vital practice that reflected the warrior ethos and offered a structured yet intense way to prove one's capabilities. This exploration of Viking wrestling delves into its traditions, techniques, cultural significance, and the respect accorded to those who excelled in the grappling arts. The tradition of wrestling in Viking society was rooted in the practical realities of Norse life. As a martial culture, Vikings needed to cultivate skills that could be directly applied in battle, and wrestling provided an ideal means to do so. Unlike many other physical contests, wrestling simulated the close-quarters combat that warriors frequently encountered in raids and skirmishes. It trained participants to grapple, restrain, and overpower opponents without weapons, honing balance, leverage, and quick reflexes, abilities that could decide life or death in a fight. The physical intensity and the requirement for strategic thinking made wrestling both challenging and highly respected. Though the exact rules of Viking wrestling are not fully documented, sagas and archaeological findings offer valuable clues. Wrestling matches were typically held outdoors during communal gatherings such as the Thing or festivals. where competitors faced off in designated open spaces. Matches were usually one-on-one contests, with the objective to throw the opponent to the ground, force them out of a defined area, or gain a dominant position. Striking was generally not part of wrestling, differentiating it from full combat, but grappling, holds and throws were central. The emphasis was on skillful manipulation of an opponent's balance and strength, requiring competitors to be both strong and tactically aware. The techniques employed in Viking wrestling likely included a range of throws, locks and holds that made use of body weight and leverage. Wrestling styles in the Norse world may have been similar to other ancient grappling traditions found across Europe and Asia, where control over an opponent's center of gravity and the use of the hips and legs were critical. The art of falling safely, or breakfall, was probably also an important skill, allowing wrestlers to recover quickly and avoid injury. These skills were transmitted orally and through practice, often taught by experienced warriors or elders, ensuring continuity and refinement across generations. Respect for wrestlers extended beyond their physical capabilities. Success in wrestling brought considerable honor and could elevate a man's status within his community. Sagas frequently mentioned champions of wrestling who were admired not only for their strength, but for their courage and fair play. Winning a wrestling match at a public gathering could enhance one's reputation, making the victor a person whose prowess was recognized and respected. Conversely, a defeat was a setback, but not necessarily dishonorable if met with grace and resolve. Wrestling matches also served as social arenas where individuals negotiated personal rivalries and alliances. The competitive yet ritualized nature of these contests allowed participants to resolve disputes or demonstrate dominance without resorting to lethal violence. The public setting of these matches, with spectators and community members present, ensured that contests were governed by customary rules and respect, reinforcing social cohesion. The atmosphere was intense yet bound by a code of honor, where cheating or unsportsmanlike behavior could lead to social sanctions. Women's participation in wrestling is less documented, but not entirely absent from the historical record. Some sagas and archaeological finds suggest that women engaged in physical contests, including wrestling, particularly in ritual or extraordinary circumstances. These accounts highlight the broader Norse appreciation for strength and resilience across genders, though women's roles in such competitions were likely more circumscribed compared to men's. The physical demands of wrestling were considerable, requiring rigorous training and conditioning. As explored earlier, Vikings prepared from youth through a regimen of physical activities designed to develop strength, agility and endurance. Wrestling was both a form of training and a competitive outlet, providing continuous opportunities to test and refine these attributes. The toll on the body was significant. Injuries were common, but the culture valorized toughness and the ability to withstand pain. The readiness to face physical hardship was a hallmark of the Viking warrior ideal. Beyond individual matches, wrestling was woven into the broader tapestry of Viking ritual and symbolism. The contest between two bodies grappling for dominance reflected larger themes of struggle and survival central to Norse mythology and cosmology. The bodily conflict was a microcosm of the eternal clash between order and chaos, strength and cunning, life and death. Winning in wrestling was not only a matter of personal victory, but a reaffirmation of one's place within the cosmic and social order. The communal aspect of wrestling contests was also significant. These events provided occasions for spectatorship and celebration, fostering a shared cultural experience. The cheers and encouragement of the crowd elevated the atmosphere, transforming wrestling matches into public spectacles that reinforced collective identity. The public recognition of victors helped to perpetuate traditions and inspire younger generations to pursue the arts of combat and competition. In summary, Viking wrestling was a complex and deeply valued practice that went far beyond mere physical contest. It was a means of preparation, a social ritual, and an expression of cultural ideals. The respect accorded to skilled wrestlers reflected the importance of strength, courage, and honor in Viking society. Through wrestling, the Norse people enacted and celebrated the virtues that defined their world, a world in which physical and mental fortitude were essential to survival and success. From the intimate and brutal world of wrestling, the narrative naturally shifts to other forms of physical contest that also played critical roles in Viking culture, including the deadly axe-throwing competitions. These contests combined skill, precision, and danger in ways that made them both practical training exercises and popular spectacles. The next part will delve into the nature and significance of axe throwing and similar martial games. The Viking Age was one of constant preparation for the brutal realities of warfare and survival, where martial skill was not only necessary on the battlefield, but also celebrated and sharpened through various competitive sports. Among these, axe throwing and knife fighting stood out as deadly tests of precision, control, and composure under pressure, skills essential for the Viking warrior. These contests were not mere entertainments. They were serious exercises that honed combat readiness, demonstrated individual prowess, and captivated audiences during communal gatherings. Axes were the quintessential Viking weapon, valued not only for their utility, but as symbols of power and identity. From the smallest hand axes used in daily tasks to the larger, battle-ready bearded axes, mastery of the axe was crucial. Axe-throwing competitions emerged naturally from this reality, providing a controlled setting to practice and display the precision needed to wield such weapons effectively. The goal was to throw an axe at a designated target with accuracy, speed, and force, testing the thrower's eye-hand coordination, strength, and technique. These contests often took place during festivals, things, or other public gatherings, where skilled throwers could attract crowds eager to witness displays of martial excellence. The targets were typically wooden boards or tree trunks, sometimes marked with concentric circles or other indicators to measure accuracy. Successful throws were measured by their closeness to the center, or their ability to embed the axe head firmly in the target. Precision was paramount. A poorly aimed or weak throw was of little value, while a well-executed throw impressed spectators and reinforced the thrower's reputation. Beyond pure entertainment, axe throwing had practical origins as a vital skill for Viking warriors. In combat, the ability to accurately throw an axe could mean the difference between victory and death. Axes were often thrown in the opening moments of a skirmish to disrupt enemy formations or disable opponents before close combat ensued. Training in axe throwing through competition ensured that warriors maintained and refined these critical skills, allowing them to act swiftly and decisively when danger loomed. Knives, similarly, played a central role in Viking martial culture and daily life. Used for both practical tasks and as weapons, knives demanded a different but equally precise skill set. Knife fighting competitions tested participants' ability to handle close-quarters combat with dexterity and speed. Though less is documented about formal knife fighting contests, sagas and historical references imply their existence as part of the broader culture of martial games. These contests likely involved controlled sparring, with rules designed to minimize serious injury while allowing combatants to demonstrate agility, timing, and technique. The knife was a more personal weapon than the axe, often carried as a companion tool and symbol of status. Mastery of the knife was a point of pride, and contests involving knives showcased individual skill and courage. Such competitions could be dramatic spectacles, with participants exhibiting feats of control, such as deflecting blows or landing precise strikes on targets or opponents. The knife's versatility made it indispensable, and its use in competitive settings reflected its importance in Viking martial life. Both axe throwing and knife fighting carried inherent risks, adding to their intensity and appeal. While organizers sought to regulate contests to prevent serious injury or death, the potential for accidents or deliberate violence remained. This danger underscored the cultural acceptance of risk and confrontation that characterized Viking society, where bravery and skill were tested in situations of real peril. The deadly precision required in these contests mirrored the life-or-death stakes of Viking combat, making them authentic expressions of martial values. Public interest in these competitions was considerable. Spectators gathered not only to witness skillful performances, but to experience the thrill of competition and danger. These events reinforced communal bonds, as the crowd collectively celebrated the achievements of their champions and shared in the suspense of close contests. Prizes, honorific titles, or symbolic rewards often accompanied victories, enhancing the social stakes of competition and motivating participants to excel. The role of these competitions extended beyond mere spectacle or training. They were also venues for social negotiation, where individuals could assert status, resolve rivalries, or build reputations. A skilled axe thrower or knife fighter might leverage their success to gain influence or forge alliances within the community. The contests thus intertwined physical prowess with social dynamics, reinforcing the complex interplay of power, honor, and identity in Viking life. In addition to festivals and things, smaller-scale axe-throwing and knife-fighting contests occurred informally in everyday settings, such as farms or shipyards. These casual contests provided ongoing opportunities to practice skills and maintain readiness. The pervasiveness of such martial games reflected the deep integration of combat preparation into daily life, blurring the boundaries between work, play, and training. The deadly precision sports of axe-throwing and knife-fighting were part of a wider culture that celebrated skill, courage, and controlled violence. Their popularity and significance reveal how Vikings maintained martial readiness while embedding it in communal and ritual contexts. These contests complemented other games, from strategic board play to wrestling, creating a comprehensive framework for cultivating the mind and body. From these sharp and dangerous contests, the narrative will now turn to another vibrant and chaotic Viking game, Knattleikr. This fast-paced, rough ball game embodied the Viking love for physical challenge and team competition, often resulting in fierce, sometimes brutal, encounters that entertained and prepared players alike. Knattleikr, a game shrouded in the mist of time yet vividly described in the sagas and historical accounts, stands as one of the most intense and physically demanding sports of the Viking Age. Unlike the calculated strategy of board games like Hnefatafl or the controlled precision of axe-throwing, Knattleikr was a chaotic and brutal contest that demanded endurance, strength, and unyielding aggression. It combined elements reminiscent of modern hockey and rugby, played with a hard ball and sticks, and was known to frequently result in serious injuries, reflecting the Viking culture's acceptance of risk and valorization of physical toughness. The origins of Knattleikr are difficult to pinpoint precisely, but references to the game appear throughout medieval Icelandic sagas, which depict it as a popular pastime among young warriors and communities. Its rules were never codified in surviving documents, leading historians to rely heavily on saga narratives and archaeological clues to reconstruct its nature. Despite this lack of formal documentation, a coherent picture emerges of a rough-and-tumble sport played on open fields or frozen lakes, characterized by intense physical contact and fierce competition. At its core, Knattleikr involved two teams, each armed with curved sticks designed to strike or carry a hard ball. The objective was to maneuver the ball past opponents and score points by hitting a designated goal area or line. Unlike many modern ball games, Knattleikr lacked strict regulation of physical contact, resulting in a violent contest where players grappled, tackled, and struck each other with little restraint. The game's aggressive nature mirrored the Viking emphasis on strength and courage, offering a socially accepted outlet for the competitive and often martial energies of its participants. Matches could be lengthy and exhausting, demanding exceptional stamina and resilience from players. The harsh climates of the north, cold winds, uneven terrain, and variable weather added to the challenge, requiring adaptability and toughness. Participation in Knattleikr was itself a testament to a player's physical and mental endurance, reinforcing qualities prized in Viking society. The game's brutal reputation was not merely a byproduct of its rules but a reflection of cultural values that celebrated bravery in the face of hardship and pain. In the sagas, Knattleikr often serves as a backdrop for social interaction, rivalry, and even conflict. The game was more than entertainment. It was a stage for demonstrating personal and group honor. Victory brought not only pride but social capital, enhancing a player's standing within the community. Conversely, defeat could be a cause for embarrassment or challenge, sometimes escalating into physical disputes off the field. These dynamics highlight how Knattleikr was deeply embedded in the social fabric, influencing relationships and hierarchies. The equipment used in Knattleikr was relatively simple but functional. The sticks, often made from sturdy wood, were curved or hooked at one end to facilitate striking and controlling the ball. The ball itself was hard and compact, crafted from materials such as wood or tightly bound leather, designed to withstand the rigors of the game. The physical toll of repeated blows from sticks and collisions among players was considerable, contributing to the game's reputation for danger. In addition to physical injuries, the aggressive nature of Knattleikr sometimes led to lasting social consequences. The intensity of competition occasionally spilled over into real violence, with disputes arising from perceived fouls or insults. However, within the regulated chaos of the game, certain unspoken codes and customs helped to maintain order and respect among players. These unwritten rules ensured that, despite the violence, the contest remained a form of ritualized conflict rather than uncontrolled brawling. Knattleikr's role extended beyond sport and social interaction. It was also a form of martial training. The physical conditioning, coordination and tactical awareness required on the field translated directly to combat situations. Players learned to anticipate opponents' moves, work as a team, and endure physical hardship, skills vital to success in battle. The game's chaotic environment simulated the unpredictability and violence of warfare, preparing participants mentally and physically for the challenges they might face beyond the playing field. The communal aspect of Knattleikr matches was significant. Games were public events, drawing spectators who gathered to watch the fierce contests. The crowd's reactions, cheers, jeers and applause added to the atmosphere, transforming matches into communal celebrations and affirmations of identity. The social cohesion fostered by these gatherings strengthened bonds within Viking communities, uniting people through shared experiences of excitement and tension. While Knattleikr was predominantly played by men, some accounts suggest that women may have also engaged in similar games or physical competitions, though these were less common and less documented. The cultural emphasis on physical strength and endurance applied broadly, though the social roles and expectations differed by gender. Despite its ferocity, Knattleikr was eventually supplanted by other sports as Viking society evolved and Christian influences grew. The increasing organization of communities and the spread of new cultural norms gradually reduced the acceptance of such violent public games. However, Knattleikr's legacy persisted, influencing later ball games in the British Isles and beyond, contributing to the development of sports such as hurling and shinty. Understanding Knattleikr sheds light on the Viking worldview, where life was seen as a constant struggle requiring courage, strength and resilience. The game encapsulated these values in a form that was simultaneously entertaining, socially significant and practically useful. It was a space where individuals could prove themselves, communities could bond, and the martial spirit of the Vikings could be both celebrated and perpetuated. From the chaotic and fierce realm of Knattleikr, the narrative will transition to another physical form of competition, the equestrian contests and horse racing that also featured prominently in Viking festivals. These events combined athleticism, skill and status, highlighting the importance of horses in Viking society and the diverse ways competition manifested in their culture. Horse racing and equestrian competitions occupied a vital place in Viking society, weaving together threads of practicality, status, and spectacle in ways that reflected the multifaceted role of horses in Norse culture. Far from mere animals for transport, horses symbolized wealth, power, and prestige, while their training and performance in races and riding contests provided both entertainment and a forum for demonstrating skill and status. These competitions, often held during communal festivals and things, were thrilling and at times dangerous affairs, underscoring the physical prowess and daring that Vikings esteemed. Horses were integral to Viking life, serving as essential companions in travel, warfare, agriculture, and trade. The varied terrain of Scandinavia, with its forests, fjords, and open plains, made horseback riding a practical necessity. Vikings relied on their horses for swift movement across challenging landscapes, enabling rapid raids, migrations, and communication between settlements. Ownership of horses was a marker of social standing, with wealthier individuals possessing larger and better-bred animals. Certain breeds were prized for their strength, speed, or endurance, and breeding horses became an important aspect of Viking wealth and economy. Equestrian skills were thus highly valued, encompassing not only the ability to ride, but also to control, train, and care for horses. Mastery over such skills reflected discipline, courage, and a connection to the natural world, qualities revered in Viking culture. Riding was not solely utilitarian, it also played a social and symbolic role, showcasing the rider's status and competence. Horse racing competitions, held during festivals and things, were among the most exciting events in the Viking calendar. These races tested speed, endurance, and the rider's ability to control their mount over often challenging courses. Tracks could vary from flat fields to rugged, uneven terrain, incorporating natural obstacles that added risk and drama. The races were intense contests where both horse and rider were pushed to their limits, their partnership crucial to success. Spectators gathered to witness these contests, their excitement heightened by the inherent danger of high-speed competition. The competitive nature of horse racing was intertwined with the social significance of victory. Winning a race elevated the rider's prestige and brought honor not only to themselves but to their family and community. Prizes might include valuable goods, livestock, or symbolic items, enhancing the stakes of competition. Success in equestrian contests also reflected a rider's suitability for leadership roles, as mastery over horses was associated with martial prowess and command. In addition to races, Vikings held other equestrian competitions that tested specific skills. These included riding contests involving precision, such as maneuvering through obstacles or demonstrating control over a spirited horse. Some contests involved mock combat on horseback, where riders showcased their ability to wield weapons or shields while riding at speed, simulating battle conditions. These events blended athleticism with martial training, reinforcing the dual role of horses as tools of war and sport. The thrill and danger inherent in these competitions were not lost on participants or spectators. Accidents were common, as high speeds and difficult terrain increased the risk of falls and injuries. The willingness to accept such risks reflected the Viking valorization of courage and physical resilience. Riders who excelled despite danger earned admiration and respect, embodying the warrior ideals celebrated in Norse culture. Horses themselves were objects of care and pride. Viking riders understood the importance of maintaining their animals' health and training, investing time and resources into breeding, feeding, and conditioning. The bond between rider and horse was profound, built on mutual trust and cooperation. This relationship was central to success in competitions, where split-second decisions and seamless coordination could determine the outcome. The social setting of these equestrian competitions further enhanced their significance. Held during festivals and public gatherings, races and riding contests were communal events that fostered social cohesion and collective identity. The crowd's enthusiasm and participation transformed these contests into celebrations of Viking culture and values. They provided opportunities for socializing, negotiating alliances, and reaffirming communal bonds through shared experience. Women's roles in equestrian culture were complex and varied. While less is documented about female riders competing in races, some historical and saga references suggest that women participated in horseback riding and may have engaged in certain riding contests. Horses also held symbolic importance in relation to women, appearing in myths and rituals that emphasized fertility, protection, and status. The prominence of horse racing and equestrian contests in Viking festivals speaks to the diversity of competitive forms in Norse society. These events complemented other games and contests, creating a rich tapestry of physical and social challenges that prepared participants for the demands of their world. From the strategic calm of board games to the physical intensity of wrestling and the chaotic violence of Knattleikr, equestrian competitions added another dynamic dimension to Viking life. As the story continues, the focus will turn to the feats of strength and endurance that were central to Viking competitions. These contests, involving lifting heavy stones, running, and swimming, were direct tests of individual physical capability and resilience. They reinforced the importance of raw power and stamina in a culture defined by survival and combat. The Vikings' appreciation for physical strength and endurance was not limited to combative contests or competitive games, but extended deeply into symbolic feats that tested the limits of individual stamina and power. Among the most iconic and culturally resonant of these challenges were the lifting of heavy stones and long-distance running. These acts were not mere demonstrations of raw physicality. They embodied the virtues of resilience, courage, and the bond between individual and community, playing a vital role in personal identity and tribal pride during the Viking Age. Heavy stone lifting, often described in saga literature and evidenced archaeologically, was a traditional test of strength that went beyond the battlefield. Large stones, sometimes weighing several hundred kilograms, were chosen or shaped specifically for these contests, with their size and weight calibrated to challenge even the strongest men. The act of lifting these stones, be it hoisting them to chest height, carrying them over a certain distance, or simply standing holding them, served as a public display of might and endurance. This practice was more than sport. It was an integral part of Viking society's valuation of physical prowess. Successfully lifting a heavy stone conferred considerable respect, marking the individual as a person of exceptional strength and stamina. Stories of legendary stone lifters were passed down through generations, inspiring young warriors to aspire to such feats. These tests were often embedded within communal festivals or rites of passage, symbolizing the transition from youth to manhood or the attainment of social status. Archaeological finds throughout Scandinavia have uncovered what are now referred to as lifting stones, often inscribed with names or records of those who successfully lifted them. Such stones were typically displayed in public spaces, serving as enduring monuments to personal achievement. The tradition persists in some regions today, where lifting stones remain part of local heritage and sporting culture, testifying to the lasting legacy of this Viking practice. Lifting stones also had practical implications beyond symbolism. The raw physical strength required to hoist massive weights mirrored the demands placed on Vikings in daily life and warfare, whether in constructing ships, carrying heavy loads, or overpowering enemies. The capacity to summon and sustain such strength was essential for survival in the harsh environments of Northern Europe, where labor and combat often intertwined. Alongside feats of strength, endurance running was another key component of Viking physical culture. Long-distance running tested stamina, cardiovascular fitness, and mental toughness, qualities necessary for both warriors and ordinary people who traversed vast and rugged landscapes. The ability to run long distances was invaluable for scouting, delivering messages, or escaping danger, making endurance a practical skill sharpened through competition and training. Running contests were held during gatherings and festivals, providing opportunities for individuals to demonstrate their stamina and speed. These races varied in length and terrain, often incorporating challenging natural features such as hills, forests, and rivers. Competitors ran barefoot or in simple footwear, adapting to the conditions with resilience. Success in these races was a source of pride and social recognition, enhancing a runner's standing within their community. The mental aspect of endurance running was as important as the physical. Vikings recognized that perseverance, focus, and the ability to push through pain and fatigue were critical traits in both competition and combat. Running tests became metaphors for the broader human struggle against hardship and the relentless demands of life. Participants were celebrated not just for winning but for demonstrating courage and tenacity. Combined, stone lifting and endurance running formed complementary tests of Viking physical culture. One emphasized brute strength and power, the other stamina and resilience. Together they provided a holistic assessment of an individual's fitness and readiness to face the challenges of their world. The results of these contests were often recorded and remembered, shaping reputations and influencing social hierarchies. These feats also played a role in tribal identity and competition. Communities might organize collective contests where representatives competed against neighboring groups, fostering a spirit of rivalry and mutual respect. Victories in such contests could bring honor not only to the individual but to the tribe or clan, reinforcing social cohesion and pride. These events were occasions for storytelling, feasting, and celebration, strengthening bonds and transmitting cultural values. The importance of these physical contests extended into ritual and mythology. Norse myths frequently highlight the strength and endurance of gods and heroes, connecting human contests to divine examples. Lifting stones and enduring trials of stamina were seen as ways to align oneself with these heroic ideals, participating in a cultural narrative that valorized strength, courage, and perseverance. Training for these feats began early in life, with children and adolescents encouraged to build strength through daily activities and games. Physical conditioning was integrated into the rhythms of Viking life, where work, play, and preparation for battle were closely linked. This holistic approach ensured that by adulthood, individuals were well prepared to meet the physical demands of their society. The cultural memory of these feats survives in the sagas, archaeological records and continuing traditions, offering insight into how Vikings understood and celebrated the human body's capabilities. They reveal a society deeply attuned to the significance of physical strength and endurance as markers of identity and survival. From these elemental contests of strength and stamina, the story now moves toward the darker and more visceral arena of blood sports. These included bear and boar baiting, events that were not only forms of entertainment but also cultural expressions of courage and dominance over nature's dangers. The next section will explore the role of these deadly spectacles within Viking society. The blood sports of boar and bear baiting, while unsettling to modern sensibilities, held a significant and complex role within Viking culture. These grisly spectacles were not merely acts of cruelty or entertainment in the casual sense, but were deeply embedded in the ritual fabric and social ethos of Norse society. They were vivid demonstrations of courage, dominance over nature's fiercest creatures, and the human struggle against untamed forces, lessons that echoed the harsh realities of Viking life and the valor celebrated in their myths and legends. Bear baiting involved the deliberate provocation of bears, often chained or confined, to face off against dogs or groups of men. This confrontation between man and beast was both a test of bravery and a display of control over a symbol of raw natural power. Bears were creatures of great strength and ferocity, revered and feared in equal measure throughout the Viking world. The sight of warriors facing these massive animals underlined ideals of heroism and mastery over chaos. Participating in or even witnessing bear baiting served as a potent reminder of the dangers inherent in the world and the need for strength and courage to overcome them. Similarly, boar baiting presented its own challenges and symbolism. Boars, known for their tenacity and aggression, were formidable opponents, especially when cornered and provoked. In Norse mythology, the boar was also a significant symbol associated with gods and warriors, representing ferocity and protection. The baiting of boars therefore carried ritual resonance, linking the physical contest to broader cultural and religious themes. Boar baiting events, like their bear counterparts, tested the valor of participants, demonstrating their readiness to face adversity and asserting dominance over nature's wild forces. These blood sports were often held during communal festivals and gatherings, such as the Thing, where the community could collectively engage with the drama and intensity of the events. The crowd's presence amplified the stakes, as participants not only battled the animals but also performed before an audience that judged their courage and skill. The event served as rites of passage for younger warriors, or as opportunities for established fighters to reinforce their reputations. The ritual significance of these events was multifaceted. On one level, they symbolized the struggle between civilization and wilderness, human order and natural chaos. Vikings saw themselves as both part of nature and its conquerors, needing to assert control over the unpredictable and often violent environment around them. Blood sports dramatized this relationship, offering a controlled yet intense arena where humans could demonstrate their supremacy and readiness for conflict. Participation in baiting was perilous, with serious risk of injury or death. This danger was part of the spectacle's appeal and cultural meaning. The willingness to face such risks marked participants as heroes, embodying the Viking ideal of fearless confrontation with mortality. Surviving or prevailing in these contests enhanced a warrior's honor and social standing, affirming their place within the community and the mythic narrative of valor. The training and preparation for blood sports paralleled that for other martial contests. Physical conditioning, mental toughness, and an understanding of animal behavior were critical. Warriors developed skills not only in combat but in managing fear and maintaining focus under extreme stress. These attributes were essential both for the baiting events and the broader demands of Viking warfare and survival. The animals involved, bears and boars, held a unique place in Viking spirituality and symbolism. Bears were often associated with the berserkers, fierce warriors who fought with a trance-like fury, believed to channel the bear's spirit. Boars appeared in mythology as sacred animals linked to fertility, protection and warrior strength. The presence of these animals in blood sports reinforced their symbolic power and the cultural importance of mastering and honoring these forces. While the modern perspective condemns such blood sports, understanding their place in Viking society requires recognizing the different cultural framework. These events were part of a world where survival demanded confrontation with danger, and social values celebrated strength, courage, and dominance over wild forces. They were communal expressions of identity and worldview, intertwining entertainment, ritual, and social order. As these violent contests demonstrated human mastery over nature's ferocity, the story now moves to examine the lighter but still meaningful Viking games centered on skill and dexterity. These included spear throwing and archery competitions, where precision and calm were prized alongside strength, offering a contrasting but complementary aspect of Viking martial culture. The practice of ritualized dueling among the Vikings offers a compelling window into the confluence of sport, social order, personal honor, and legal tradition within their society. Far from being mere physical contests or spectacles of violence, these duels, often fatal, served as formalized mechanisms to resolve disputes, assert status, and uphold justice. Embedded within a complex framework of laws, customs, and beliefs, Viking duels represented a unique blend of competitive combat and judicial procedure, reflecting the values and tensions of a society where personal grievances and communal peace had to be delicately balanced. At the heart of Viking culture was a strong emphasis on honor, reputation, and the ability to defend oneself and one's family. Disputes, whether over land, insults, breaches of contract, or personal affronts, could escalate rapidly in a society where words carried great weight and violence was a pervasive reality. When negotiations or mediation failed, a duel offered a way to resolve matters definitively. These confrontations were not mere brawls but followed established customs that lent them legitimacy and order amidst potential chaos. The legal context of dueling in Viking society was intertwined with the Thing, the communal assembly where laws were discussed and disputes adjudicated. While the Thing aimed to maintain social order and resolve conflicts peacefully, it also recognized the role of duels as legitimate forms of trial and reparation. In certain cases, parties agreed or were ordered to settle disputes through combat, a practice known as holmgang. This ritualized duel was governed by rules that specified the weapons allowed, the location, often a small island or designated area, and the conditions for victory. Holmgang was more than a fight. It was a solemn ceremony imbued with religious and social significance. The combatants prepared with seriousness, often invoking the gods for strength and protection. Witnesses observed to ensure fairness and adherence to the rules, and the outcome, death or submission, was accepted as a final judgment. In this way, dueling functioned as a form of trial by combat, where divine will was believed to influence the victor, blending justice with fate. The weapons used in Viking duels varied but typically included swords, axes, spears, and shields, each carrying symbolic and practical importance. Combatants demonstrated their martial skill and courage, knowing that their survival and honor depended on their proficiency and composure. The deadly nature of these contests underscored the high stakes involved. Losing could mean death, exile, or loss of property and status. Beyond the formal holmgang, other forms of dueling and personal combat occurred in less regulated contexts. Feuds between families or individuals might erupt into violent encounters resembling duels, but lacking the official sanction of the Thing. These fights were often driven by long-standing grudges and could escalate into cycles of retaliation, challenging the stability of communities. However, even in such conflicts, cultural norms around honor, fairness, and courage influenced behavior, preventing unchecked brutality. The social implications of dueling were profound. Victorious duelists gained immense respect and often increased their social standing, reinforcing the meritocratic aspects of Viking society, where personal ability and bravery could elevate one's position. Conversely, those who lost or fled risked shame and dishonor, which could have lasting consequences for themselves and their kin. The ritualized nature of dueling thus reinforced communal values by making honor and justice public matters. To religious beliefs intertwined closely with the practice of dueling, Norse mythology emphasized the role of fate, word, and the gods' involvement in human affairs. All warriors saw combat as a test not only of skill but of destiny, with Odin, the god of war, death, and wisdom, often invoked as a patron of fighters. The idea that the gods guided the outcome of duels gave these confrontations a spiritual dimension, elevating them beyond mere mortal contests. The psychological preparation for dueling was as crucial as physical readiness. Combatants had to maintain focus, manage fear, and accept the possibility of death with stoic resolve. Stories from the sagas illustrate the mental fortitude required, with duelists displaying calm determination and strategic thinking under extreme pressure. This mental aspect reflected the Viking ideal of the fearless warrior who faced fate without hesitation. The cultural memory of Viking duels endures in literature, archaeology, and later European traditions influenced by Norse practices. Holmgang and other forms of trial by combat left their mark on medieval legal systems, where combat was sometimes employed to resolve disputes when other evidence was lacking. The rituals and symbolism associated with Viking dueling continue to fascinate scholars and enthusiasts, offering insight into a society where violence, law, and honor were deeply interconnected. As the narrative progresses from the lethal one-on-one confrontations of dueling, attention shifts to another form of Viking competition that combined physical endurance, tactical skill, and teamwork: rowing and boat races. These contests highlighted the maritime prowess that was central to Viking identity and their expansive influence across the seas. The Viking Age, often remembered predominantly for its warrior culture and male-dominated society, also presents a more nuanced picture when examining the roles of women, particularly in relation to games and competitions. While the historical and literary records highlight the predominance of men in many martial and athletic contests, there is growing evidence and scholarly interpretation that women too engaged in physical contests, exercised agency, and held distinctive status within Viking culture. This exploration reveals the complex intersections of gender, power, and competition, as well as the occasional deadly games involving women that reflect broader societal values and contradictions. The status of women in Viking society was multifaceted and varied across regions, social classes, and periods within the Viking Age. Archaeological findings such as richly furnished graves of women buried with weapons and high-status goods, alongside literary sources like the sagas and law codes, suggest that Viking women could wield considerable influence, both domestically and publicly. They managed households, owned property, and in some cases, assumed roles that intersected with leadership and warrior traditions. This social backdrop provided a foundation for female participation in various forms of competition and physical expression. One of the clearest indicators of women's involvement in physical contests comes from saga literature, which occasionally recounts tales of women exhibiting exceptional strength, skill, and courage. These stories, though sometimes mythologized, point to a cultural space where women could demonstrate physical prowess. For example, accounts of women participating in wrestling matches or endurance challenges appear in several narratives, portraying female figures not merely as passive observers, but active contenders in competitive arenas. Archaeological evidence further complicates the traditional view of Viking gender roles. The discovery of graves such as the Birka warrior burial in Sweden, initially thought to be male, but later confirmed through DNA analysis to be female, challenges assumptions about exclusive male dominance in martial activities. While these findings primarily relate to combat roles, they imply that women who trained in physical skills and engaged in contests were not unheard of. This suggests that certain women may have also participated in organized games or martial contests, possibly including those with dangerous or deadly elements. The types of competitions in which women engaged likely varied, but would have included events testing strength, endurance, and skill. Wrestling, for instance, was a widespread form of physical contest in Viking culture, and some sagas mention women wrestling, either in formal settings or informal challenges. Endurance contests such as running or swimming could also have been arenas for female participation, especially in communities where physical fitness was vital for survival and daily tasks. Deadly games involving women, while rare in the historical record, appear in some sagas and legends, often serving as dramatic narrative devices that illustrate themes of honor, sacrifice, and defiance. These stories sometimes depict women voluntarily entering dangerous contests to protect family honor or exact revenge, reflecting a cultural recognition of female courage and agency. Though not indicative of widespread practice, such accounts underscore the complex ways in which gender and violence intersected in Viking society. The participation of women in competitions also had social and ritual dimensions. Physical contests could serve as rites of passage, affirming status and maturity. For women, demonstrating strength or skill might have enhanced marriage prospects or reinforced their standing within the community. Moreover, competitive events involving women contributed to communal celebrations and reinforced social cohesion, just as male contests did. Religious and mythological elements influence the perception of women's physical contests. Norse mythology features powerful female figures such as the Valkyries, warrior maidens who chose the slain and served Odin, and goddesses associated with fertility, war and protection. These mythic archetypes may have inspired and legitimized real-world female participation in contests of strength and courage, embedding these practices within a spiritual framework. Despite these indications, it is important to acknowledge that Viking society remained patriarchal, and women's opportunities for participation in certain games and competitions were likely limited by social norms and expectations. Public, large-scale martial contests predominantly involved men, reflecting their primary roles as warriors and leaders. Nevertheless, the evidence for female involvement challenges simplistic dichotomies and invites a re-evaluation of gender roles in Viking culture. The legacy of women in Viking games and competitions resonates in later Scandinavian folklore and cultural memory, where tales of strong, skilled women persisted. These stories contributed to a broader understanding of Viking society as one with more fluid and varied gender dynamics than traditionally assumed. As the narrative progresses from the role of women in Viking contests, it will turn to the social functions of feasts and gift-giving ceremonies, where games were often intertwined with celebrations of alliances, status, and reciprocity. These communal occasions framed competitions within broader patterns of social life, emphasizing their importance beyond mere physical challenge. The Viking Age was an era defined by conflict, exploration, and the constant interplay between survival and dominance. Within this milieu, the development of skills vital for warfare was paramount. Far from being mere pastimes, many Viking games and competitions served as practical training grounds, honing abilities directly transferable to the battlefield. These contests blended physical endurance, tactical thinking, weapon proficiency, and mental resilience, shaping warriors who were not only fierce but also highly skilled and disciplined. The intertwining of play and preparation for war exemplifies the pragmatic yet culturally rich approach Vikings took toward competition and martial readiness. From youth onward, Viking society emphasized the cultivation of martial skills, recognizing that survival depended on an individual's capacity to fight effectively. Games became essential instruments in this process, offering structured yet dynamic environments where warriors could practice and refine techniques. Unlike modern sports, which often prioritize entertainment or health, Viking games were deeply pragmatic, designed to simulate aspects of combat or to enhance the physical attributes crucial for fighting. One of the most direct ways games served as military training was through contests involving hand-to-hand combat and grappling. Wrestling matches, for example, were ubiquitous and highly valued. These bouts developed strength, balance, and close-quarter fighting techniques. Grappling skills were essential in battle, where shields and weapons could be lost or become ineffective in tight melee situations. The ability to control, throw, or incapacitate an opponent without weapons was a critical survival skill. Wrestling contests often featured rules and conditions that mimicked the unpredictability and intensity of real combat, including varied terrain and minimal restrictions on holds or moves. Weapon handling was another core aspect honed through Viking games. Competitions in axe throwing, spear tossing, and knife fighting were not simply tests of accuracy, but exercises in weapon control, timing, and mental focus. These events simulated the demands of combat, where precise and swift strikes could determine life or death. Training through games allowed warriors to develop muscle memory and confidence with their weapons in a less lethal setting, preparing them for the chaotic realities of battle. Board games such as Hnefatafl also contributed indirectly to military preparedness by sharpening strategic thinking. While not a physical contest, the intellectual challenge of outmaneuvering an opponent on the board paralleled battlefield tactics. Players practiced foresight, deception and adaptability, qualities essential to leadership and success in war. The mental discipline cultivated through these strategic games complemented the physical training provided by martial contests. The communal nature of Viking games further enhanced their utility for warfare. Competitions were often held during festivals, things or other social gatherings where warriors could observe and learn from one another. The sharing of techniques, the observation of different fighting styles, and the testing of skills in front of peers fostered an environment of continuous improvement. Public recognition for prowess reinforced motivation, encouraging participants to refine their abilities consistently. Training through games was not limited to physical skills but also encompassed mental resilience and emotional control. The pressures of competition, the need to remain calm under attack, and the experience of facing pain or defeat cultivated psychological toughness. This mental preparation was critical for warriors who would face the uncertainty and brutality of battle. The ability to maintain composure and focus under stress could mean the difference between victory and death. The cultural context of Viking games as training tools was reinforced by religious and mythological beliefs. Warriors sought the favor of gods such as Odin, who was associated with war, wisdom, and death. Rituals before contests often involved prayers or sacrifices to gain divine blessing, linking martial games to spiritual preparation. This connection underscored the seriousness with which these contests were approached, not merely as entertainment but as sacred exercises in readiness and honor. The training value of games extended to specialized warrior groups such as the berserkers, fierce fighters reputed to enter trance-like states during battle. Their reputed practices included intense physical and mental preparation, possibly incorporating specific contests designed to push limits and cultivate ferocity. While historical details remain partly shrouded in legend, the underlying principle that games and rituals prepared warriors for the extremities of combat is consistent. The pragmatic use of games for military training also shaped Viking society's broader attitudes toward competition. Success in games was a marker of competence and valor, signaling an individual's readiness to defend community and kin. Conversely, failure could diminish status and invite challenges. This social pressure reinforced continuous engagement with training activities, integrating martial preparation into everyday life. As Viking society evolved, the integration of games and military training influenced cultural expressions such as poetry and storytelling. Skaldic verse often celebrated feats achieved in contests and battle, immortalizing the skills and virtues cultivated through games. These narratives reinforced the ideals of courage, strength, and honor that underpinned both sport and warfare. The legacy of using games as training for battle extended beyond the Viking Age, influencing later medieval martial practices in Scandinavia and Europe. The conceptual link between sport and soldiering remains a theme in military history, illustrating the enduring relevance of these ancient competitions. As this exploration of games as martial training concludes, the narrative will shift toward the spiritual and symbolic dimensions of Viking contests, examining how these physical and strategic challenges intersected with religious ritual and cultural meaning. The Viking Age was marked by a rich tapestry of social gatherings, among which festivals and public games stood out as vibrant centers of communal life. These events were not only occasions for entertainment, but also critical social forums where alliances were forged, reputations made, and cultural values celebrated. The spectacle of Viking games, particularly those with deadly or dangerous elements, engaged large audiences in an immersive and intense atmosphere that combined excitement, tension, and communal participation. Understanding the sensory and social environment of these gatherings offers profound insight into the collective experience of Viking society. Viking festivals and things, often held at significant seasonal or political moments, attracted people from surrounding regions, drawing warriors, chieftains, artisans, and common folk alike. These gatherings transformed landscapes into bustling hubs of activity, filled with the sounds of music, conversation, the clatter of weapons and the buzz of anticipation. The spatial arrangement of these events, whether in open fields, near halls, or beside waterways, was carefully chosen to accommodate large crowds and accommodate a variety of activities, including games, feasting and legal proceedings. The games themselves, ranging from physical contests to strategic challenges, were focal points of the festival's spectacle. Wrestling matches, axe-throwing competitions, and the chaotic ball game, Knattleikr, were staged with deliberate theatricality, their rules and procedures designed to heighten drama and maintain order. Deadly contests, such as duels or blood sports, were both feared and revered, their very danger intensifying audience engagement. Spectators gathered close enough to witness every strike, grapple or fall, sharing in the thrill and horror of combat. The audience played an active role in these events, their reactions shaping the atmosphere and flow of the competitions. Cheers, jeers, and shouts punctuated the contests, encouraging participants or expressing collective judgment. The crowd's mood could shift rapidly from exhilaration at a display of skill to stunned silence at an injury or fatal blow. This dynamic interaction between performers and spectators created a powerful communal experience, binding individuals through shared emotional investment. Gambling was another integral aspect of the Viking game's spectacle. Betting on outcomes added layers of excitement and risk for the audience, intertwining financial stakes with social prestige. Wagers might be placed on the winner of a wrestling match, the accuracy of an axe thrower, or the outcome of a horse race. The practice of gambling elevated the games beyond passive observation, involving spectators in the unfolding drama and amplifying their engagement. The social diversity of the audience further enriched the atmosphere. Vikings from various social strata, jarls, carls and even thralls mingled during these gatherings, although social distinctions remained apparent. Games provided a rare arena where merit and performance could momentarily transcend class, as skill and bravery won admiration regardless of rank. This leveling effect fostered a sense of communal identity, even as hierarchies persisted. The sensory experience of Viking games was intense and multifaceted. The smell of smoke from fires and cooking mingled with the earthy scents of fields and animals. The clanging of weapons, the grunts and shouts of competitors, and the rhythmic pounding of hooves during horse races created an immersive soundscape. Visual spectacle came from colorful clothing, banners, and the dynamic movement of combatants and horses. These elements combined to produce a vivid environment that captivated all who attended. Religious and ritual elements often framed the games, adding solemnity and spiritual significance to the spectacle. Invocations to gods such as Odin or Thor might precede contests, with sacrifices or offerings made to ensure favor and protection. The audience shared in these rites, reinforcing the sacred dimensions of the competitions and connecting the physical contests to broader cosmic beliefs. The communal nature of these gatherings also served political and economic functions. Feasts and games offered opportunities for leaders to display wealth and generosity, securing loyalty and alliances. Trade and negotiation flourished alongside competition, making festivals vital nodes of social and economic exchange. The spectacle of games thus intertwined with the practical workings of Viking society. Despite the often brutal nature of the contests, the overall atmosphere was one of celebration and collective identity. The games were moments of shared excitement and tension that brought communities together, affirming cultural values of courage, skill, and honor. They also provided structured outlets for aggression and competition, helping to maintain social cohesion. As the story continues, the focus will shift to the legacy of Viking games in modern culture and historical memory. This examination will consider how these ancient competitions have been interpreted, romanticized, and understood in contemporary contexts. The Viking Age was a society profoundly shaped by the values of honor, reputation, and courage, ideals that permeated every aspect of life, including the deadly games and competitions that formed a core part of their culture. Within these contests, the consequences of defeat extended far beyond the immediate physical toll. They struck deeply at the social and personal identity of participants, influencing their standing within the community, and often dictating their future prospects. Understanding the gravity of loss in these brutal arenas requires an exploration of the intertwined concepts of honor, shame, and death that governed Viking social dynamics. Honor Drenskap was the cornerstone of Viking identity, a precious asset maintained through brave deeds, skill, and adherence to cultural norms. To win in competition or battle was to accumulate honor, elevating one's status and ensuring remembrance in stories and sagas. Victory conferred praise, respect, and often tangible rewards such as land, wealth, or social advancement. Conversely, defeat was not merely a personal failure, it represented a rupture in the social fabric, an exposure of weakness that could invite scorn and diminish one's influence. In the context of deadly games, losing could have immediate physical consequences. Injuries sustained in combat or contests might leave a participant maimed or permanently impaired. The harsh realities of Viking medical care meant that even non-fatal wounds could lead to lasting disability or death from infection. Such outcomes severely limited a person's ability to participate in future contests, warfare, or daily tasks essential for survival, thereby affecting their social and economic standing. More profoundly, the psychological and social consequences of defeat could be devastating. Shame scum was a powerful social sanction in Viking culture, as destructive as physical harm. To be shamed meant to suffer loss of face before one's peers, family, and community, a form of social death that could isolate an individual and damage familial honor. Stories from the sagas recount how shame could lead to lifelong ostracism, or drive men and women to desperate acts to reclaim dignity, including revenge killings or exile. The public nature of Viking games amplified the stakes of defeat. Competitions were often held before large audiences of kin, allies, and rivals, who witnessed the outcome and passed judgment. A loser faced not only personal loss but communal scrutiny, which could result in lasting damage to reputation. This public dimension enforced a high standard of conduct and performance, compelling participants to prepare rigorously and to face contests with unwavering resolve. Death was an ever-present risk in many Viking games, especially those with lethal elements such as duels, blood sports, or the chaotic ball game Knattleikr. The acceptance of mortality was woven into the cultural fabric. Dying bravely in contest or battle was often seen as an honorable end, guaranteeing a place in Valhalla, Odin's Hall of the Slain. However, death also meant loss for families and communities, underscoring the heavy price of these deadly pursuits. For survivors, the aftermath of defeat required navigation through complex social rituals aimed at restoring balance and honor. Compensation through fines or gifts might be offered to the injured party or their kin, aligning with the legal traditions of the thing. In cases of fatality, funerary rites and memorialization played crucial roles in honoring the deceased and mitigating social tensions. These practices reflected the communal importance of reconciliation and the management of honor dynamics. The sagas and historical records provide numerous accounts illustrating these consequences. Heroes who faced defeat grappled with the fallout, while victors often leveraged their success to consolidate power and influence. The narratives highlight the cultural mechanisms that balanced individual ambition with communal stability, using honor and shame as regulatory forces. In sum, the consequences of defeat in Viking deadly games were multifaceted and profound, affecting physical well-being, social standing, psychological health, and even life itself. These outcomes reinforced the seriousness with which Vikings approached competition and the cultural importance of courage, skill, and honor in shaping individual and collective identity. As the story moves forward, it will explore how the memory and mythology of Viking games have persisted, influencing modern perceptions and cultural representations of this storied era. The story of Viking games is not one of static tradition but of continuous transformation, shaped by shifting cultural values, political developments, and external influences. While the Viking Age, roughly late 8th to mid-11th century, is often remembered for its vibrant, sometimes deadly contests of strength, skill, and endurance, these activities did not vanish overnight. Instead, they evolved, sometimes adapting to new social norms, sometimes fading entirely under the pressures of changing times. Tracing the evolution and eventual decline of these games requires an understanding of the interplay between Viking cultural identity, the rise of centralized authority, and the profound impact of Christianization across Scandinavia. In the earlier stages of the Viking Age, games and competitions were deeply entwined with the warrior ethos. Physical contests such as wrestling, gleamer, stone lifting, spear throwing, and Knattleikr were not mere pastimes. They were essential training for war, woven into the social fabric as demonstrations of personal worth and communal pride. The winners of these games gained honor, drenskapper, and social influence, while the losers risked shame, scum, and diminished standing. The intensity of such contests reflected a society where survival often depended on physical ability, quick thinking, and the respect of one's peers. However, as the Viking Age progressed, the nature of warfare, politics, and everyday life began to change. By the late 10th and early 11th centuries, many Scandinavian kingdoms were becoming more centralized under powerful monarchs. The constant raiding and expansion that had characterized earlier generations gave way to more settled forms of governance. This shift had a direct effect on the role of games in society. While training for battle remained important, the need for constant readiness diminished for large segments of the population, and so the competitive landscape began to shift from life-or-death preparation to more controlled forms of entertainment. Christianization was perhaps the single most transformative force in this evolution. As Christianity spread across Scandinavia, often through a combination of royal decree, missionary work, and political alliance, it brought with it new moral frameworks that clashed with certain pagan customs. Many Viking games had religious or ritualistic underpinnings tied to Norse mythology, seasonal festivals, or rites of passage. For example, duels Holmgang were not just personal disputes, but were often framed as acts of divine judgment, where victory was seen as proof of the gods' favor. Under Christian moral codes, such bloodshed outside of formal judicial processes was increasingly discouraged or outright banned. By the 11th century, Holmgang had been outlawed in many regions, signaling a major shift in the cultural acceptance of deadly games. Animal baiting, another popular Viking spectacle, also began to face opposition under Christian influence. While the early medieval church was not uniformly opposed to all forms of animal cruelty, the association of baiting with pagan festivals and sacrificial symbolism meant it became an easy target for suppression. Over time, such activities either vanished or were transformed into less overtly ritualistic forms, sometimes blending into rural folk traditions that persisted in more remote areas. The decline of ritualized violence did not mean an end to Viking-era games altogether. Many physical competitions were simply adapted to fit new contexts. Wrestling remained popular well into the medieval period, though it often shifted from a warrior's trial to a sport performed at markets, fairs, or seasonal gatherings. Knattleikr, while less common by the High Middle Ages, seems to have influenced later Scandinavian ball games that were more recreational than combative. Even the famed feats of strength, lifting massive stones, carrying heavy logs, or dragging ships, persisted as local challenges and tests of manhood, though increasingly divorced from their earlier warrior training functions. The political consolidation of Scandinavian kingdoms also played a role in this evolution. Kings and regional lords recognized the power of public gatherings, including games, as tools for reinforcing loyalty and demonstrating authority. Competitions could serve as showcases for the ruler's wealth, generosity, and ability to maintain order. Yet this also meant that games were increasingly subject to rules and oversight, reducing the spontaneous and often lethal nature of earlier contests. What had once been raw tests of survival skill became more ceremonial, entertainment-oriented events that nonetheless preserved echoes of their martial origins. Trade and cultural exchange during the later Viking Age also introduced new influences. Hnefatafl with the British Isles, continental Europe, and the East brought different forms of sport, tournament-style competition, and organized martial displays. While Viking culture certainly influenced others, the reverse was also true. By the 12th century, Scandinavian elites were increasingly participating in activities similar to medieval tournaments, which blended chivalric ideals with controlled martial display, a far cry from the chaotic, often deadly Viking games of the 9th century. Another factor in the decline of certain games was the changing economy. As raiding gave way to trade and farming as dominant economic activities, the everyday skills needed for survival shifted. Maritime navigation, agricultural work, and craft production demanded different kinds of expertise. While physical strength and endurance were still valued, The specific training provided by dangerous competitive games was no longer as vital for the majority of the population. Yet, despite these changes, the memory of Viking games did not vanish. Sagas, written in the centuries after the Viking Age, preserved detailed accounts of legendary contests, keeping alive the cultural memory of a time when skill, courage, and honor were tested in public spectacles. These stories often romanticize the past, emphasizing the bravery and glory of participants while smoothing over the bloodier, more dangerous aspects. In this way, the legacy of Viking games continued to inspire, even as the actual practices faded or transformed. By the late medieval period, many of the once deadly games had been reduced to safer folk traditions, still physically demanding but less likely to end in serious injury or death. Wrestling, stone lifting, and competitive rowing persisted, often tied to festivals and seasonal celebrations. Ball games, while less brutal than Knattleikr, remained part of community life. Some regions even retained ceremonial versions of older contests, performed more for heritage and identity than for training or dispute resolution. The decline of Viking games, then, was not a simple matter of disappearance but a gradual, complex process of adaptation. As Christianity reshaped moral codes, as centralized kingdoms imposed order, and as economic and political realities changed, the games evolved from life-or-death trials of warrior culture into a mix of safer sports, ceremonial displays, and cherished folk traditions. What was lost in raw danger was often gained in broader community participation, allowing more people, including women and children, to take part in the joy of physical competition without the looming threat of mortal consequences. And yet, for all these transformations, the spirit of the Viking games, the celebration of skill, strength, and courage before a watching community, remained intact. Even in their softened medieval and modern forms, they carried with them the echoes of an age when the stakes were higher, the risks greater, and the rewards more enduring in memory and honor. The passing of centuries has a way of transforming the brutal into the ceremonial, the dangerous into the regulated, and the deadly into the nostalgic. Viking games, forged in an age when survival depended on strength, cunning, and a willingness to embrace risk, might seem alien to the polite competitions of the modern world, yet their echoes can still be felt, quietly shaping the structure of many contemporary sports and lingering as shadows in the popular imagination. The Vikings themselves would scarcely recognize these softened forms, but the bones of their contests, the core ideals of honor, skill, endurance, and spectacle, still live on, sometimes in ways so subtle that they escape notice, and sometimes in forms that proudly declare their ancient lineage. Consider first the physical contests of strength that were once so central to Viking gatherings. The stone-lifting competitions, where a young man might prove himself worthy of joining a ship's crew by hoisting a massive rock from the ground and carrying it over a set distance, have faded in their raw form, but the principle survives in modern strength sports. Highland games in Scotland, for instance, feature the caber toss and the stone put, events that, while distinct in their details, carry the same spirit of testing sheer physical power against the immovable. Even weightlifting and strongman competitions, staged in arenas under bright electric lights, owe something to these early tests, where the weight was not a barbell with perfect symmetry, but a rough, uneven stone that bit into the skin of the forearms and demanded not only muscle but stubbornness. Wrestling, too, bears the unmistakable imprint of Viking influence. The grappling arts of Scandinavia were not gentle. They were designed for both sport and survival, teaching balance, leverage, and the ability to unseat a foe, even in the chaos of battle. Modern wrestling, whether the folk styles of Europe, the disciplined matches of Olympic competition, or the entertainment-driven spectacle of professional wrestling, still carries the fundamental concept of two opponents locked in a contest where brute strength alone is rarely enough, and where mastery comes from the marriage of strength and technique. Judo, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and other martial arts, though from far-off lands, share this universal warrior's understanding that knowing how to control another's body is as essential as wielding a weapon. Weapons training itself, which once found expression in contests of axe-throwing and knife-fighting, has largely shed its lethal edge in public settings, yet even here the threads connect past to present. Modern axe-throwing venues, often seen as casual recreational spaces in cities from Oslo to New York, are in truth reenactments of skills once honed to keep a Viking alive in battle. Archery, which the Norse also valued, survives both as an Olympic sport and as a popular pastime, its lethal precision transformed into a demonstration of focus and control. Even fencing, with its blunted blades and rigid rules, shares a kindred spirit with the duels once fought under the Viking sun, where victory and death were decided by the blade's point. The games of strategy, too, have endured, though they have changed their appearance more than their purpose. The Viking board game Hnefatafl, once a battlefield in miniature, has largely vanished from casual play, supplanted by chess, a game introduced to Europe after contact with the Islamic world, but quickly embraced by the Norse elite. Both games teach the same lesson, that victory belongs not just to the strong but to the clever, the one who can anticipate moves ahead and control the flow of conflict. In recent years, there has been a revival of interest in Hnefatafl, with historians, reenactors and game enthusiasts reconstructing its rules and producing beautiful handcrafted boards. Each match a quiet echo of the strategic contests once played beside a roaring fire in a longhouse. Knattleikr, the chaotic ball game, whose blend of physical collision and strategic movement made it as dangerous as it was thrilling, has left no direct descendant, yet its spirit can be glimpsed in rugby, ice hockey, and even American football, sports where physical contact is central, teamwork is essential, and the will to keep moving forward, despite bruises and exhaustion, marks the difference between victory and defeat. The modern safety equipment and referee whistles would no doubt puzzle a Viking player, yet they would understand the fierce loyalty between teammates, the tactical maneuvers to outflank an opponent, and the thrill of a crowd roaring approval. Even equestrian competitions carry traces of the Viking past. Horse racing in its modern form is a global sport, yet the intimate bond between rider and mount, and the understanding that speed, endurance and agility can mean the difference between triumph and ruin, was as deeply felt in the Viking Age as it is in today's racecourses. In Iceland, which has preserved more of its medieval traditions than much of Scandinavia, riding competitions still take place using the sturdy Icelandic horse, a breed unchanged in centuries, carrying its rider with the same proud gait it did when Viking warriors raced along the black sand shores. Beyond the physical mechanics of the games, perhaps the most enduring legacy is cultural. The Vikings understood that competition was never just about the participants. It was about the audience, the shared experience, the forging of communal identity through spectacle. All that understanding survives in every packed stadium, every roaring crowd, every communal viewing of an Olympic final or a World Cup match. Modern sports may not end in blood, but they still end in glory and disappointment, in the swelling pride of the victor's supporters and the quiet ache of those whose champion fell short. Popular culture has also played its part in carrying the torch of Viking games. Films, television series, and video games depict these contests with varying degrees of accuracy, sometimes leaning heavily into the brutality, sometimes romanticizing the camaraderie and honor. The imagery of the Viking warrior standing tall with axe in hand or grappling a foe in the dirt has become shorthand for a certain kind of primal courage, the raw, unpolished strength that appeals to a deep human fascination with our own warrior past. In reenactment communities and historical festivals across the world, Viking games are recreated with care, their rules restored from sagas and archaeological finds, their weapons dulled but their competitive spirit sharp as ever. There is also a growing recognition that these games were more than simple diversions. They were tools for teaching, for preparing the young for the demands of life in a harsh world. They trained not only the body but the mind, reinforcing lessons about honor, endurance, adaptability, and the consequences of both victory and defeat. In this sense, the legacy of Viking games survives not just in the sports we play, but in the very concept of organized competition, in the belief that testing oneself against others is both a personal trial and a contribution to the larger community. Yet with all this continuity, something vital has been lost in the transformation. The danger, the real risk of injury or death, was not incidental to the Viking games. It was the very crucible that made them meaningful. In removing the mortal stakes, Modern sports have made contests safer and more accessible, but they have also shifted their nature. A Viking watching a modern match might admire the skill and the strategy, but he might also see it as play without the shadow of fate hovering close, as performance without the same binding power of shared risk. This is perhaps inevitable, for we live in a world that values safety over danger, preservation over glory at any cost. Still, in those rare moments when a modern athlete pushes beyond the limits, when a crowd feels the pulse of shared anticipation, when a game tips into chaos and becomes more about survival than score, there is a faint echo of that older world, where every contest was a brush with destiny, and perhaps it is in those echoes that the truest legacy resides, not in the exact replication of the past, but in the persistence of its spirit, a spirit that continues to shape how we play, how we compete, and how we remember. The Vikings may have passed into history, their games faded into story, but the hunger for challenge, for mastery, and for the recognition of one's peers remains as sharp today as it was when warriors tested themselves under the watchful gaze of Odin. And as we turn now to consider not only how these games have endured, but what they reveal about the people who played them, we must look beyond the contests themselves, into the world that shaped them, and the lessons they carried forward, lessons that still speak across the centuries, if one is willing to listen. Beneath the fading twilight of the Viking Age, when the longships no longer prowled every coast with the same hunger as before, and the clangor of steel on shield had grown distant in many corners of the Norse world, the memory of the games endured like embers, glowing in the ashes of a great hearth. These contests, whether the brutal crush of Knattleikr, the focused precision of an axe thrown true, or the silent, tense strategy of a Hnefatafl match, were never mere distractions in the lives of the people who played them. They were mirrors held up to Viking life itself, reflecting values so deeply ingrained that even as centuries shifted and beliefs transformed, their essence could still be traced. In the tales and sagas, these games appear not as background color, but as essential threads woven into the identity of a society that lived with one foot in the world of men and the other firmly planted in the realm of gods and fate. Every throw of a weapon, every heave of a lifting stone, every lock and twist of a wrestler's arms was an enactment of something larger than the act itself. It was a statement about who you were, how much you could endure, and whether you were worthy of the respect of your kin and the watchful eyes of your ancestors. Violence in Viking games was never random, though from an outsider's perspective, it may have seemed reckless or even wanton. The Norse understanding of life was rooted in a world where danger and death were constant companions, whether from the sea, the sword, or the unforgiving winters. To face these realities without flinching was to live in accordance with the Viking code, and the games offered a controlled, though sometimes only barely controlled, space in which this courage could be displayed and measured. A man who faltered in the wrestling circle, who could not throw his opponent, or at least prove himself unyielding in defeat, risked more than a bruised body. He risked whispers that might haunt him in the longhouse for years. Likewise, a poor showing in weapon contests could mark a man as unreliable in battle, while victory could elevate his name beyond the limits of his birth. Honor was a currency more valuable than silver, and the games were a forge in which it was tested and shaped. This was a society where life and death could hinge on one's strength, cunning, and readiness for action, and so the line between sport and survival was thin indeed. Yet the games were not only about violence, they were also about connection. The Thing gatherings, festivals and communal feasts where contests took place were moments when far-flung families met, alliances were made, and the web of kinship was rewoven in the open air. Cheering crowds were not passive observers, but participants in the shared narrative of courage and skill. Even gambling on matches, frowned upon by some, was another way of investing in the drama of the games. The stakes were not only personal, they were communal, and the reputation of a village or clan could rise or fall with the performance of its best competitors. In this way, the games also acted as a kind of public history. Stories of famous matches, daring feats and notorious defeats would be told and retold across generations, carried by skalds whose verses gave the deeds a place in the larger saga of the Norse people. Through these retellings, the games became more than the events themselves. They became symbols of the ideals they embodied, A wrestling champion could be compared to a legendary warrior. A cunning Hnefatafl player might be likened to Odin himself for his foresight and craft. These analogies were not idle flattery. They reinforced the idea that every contest was part of a larger cosmic order, where skill and fate danced together under the eyes of the gods. The presence of women in some of these contests adds another layer to the reflection. While their participation was less common, the sagas and archaeological finds remind us that the Viking Age was not bound by the same rigid expectations that later European societies imposed. Women who wrestled, hunted, or excelled at games were remembered not as curiosities but as individuals who had carved their own place in the culture's memory. This inclusion speaks to a certain pragmatism in Norse society. Skill and courage were to be valued wherever they were found, for they benefited the community as a whole. As the Viking Age faded into history, and Christianity's influence grew, many of these games lost their ritual or deadly edges, yet their legacy persisted in subtle ways. In the love of competition, in the respect for endurance, in the idea that games could be as revealing of character as they were entertaining. Modern sports may not demand blood as the price of defeat, but the thrill of competition, the pride in victory, and even the sting of loss still echo those ancient arenas. When people today gather to watch a wrestling match, a horse race, or a strategic board game, they are, in a way, taking part in a tradition that stretches back to the windswept fields of Scandinavia, where longships waited at the shore, and the scent of roasting meat drifted over the sound of laughter and challenge. In the end, to look at Viking games is to look at the Vikings themselves, fierce yet communal, violent yet bound by honor, lovers of skill as much as strength, and deeply aware that every act was part of a story larger than any one life. The games were not diversions from reality, they were reality distilled into moments of pure contest, where the measure of a person could be seen as clearly as a ship's shadow on still water. And though the fields where they once played have grown quiet, and the rules of the games are now recorded more in books than in living memory, the spirit behind them still speaks. It tells us that for the Vikings, life was itself a game of strength, cunning and courage, one in which every move mattered, and where, win or lose, the only true disgrace was to refuse to play. And so, as the last echoes of the Viking games fade into the long hush of the northern night, the images remain, figures moving against the pale light of a northern sun, the thud of stone on earth, the splash of oars in a fjord beyond the field, the sharp ring of iron striking iron. They stand now only in memory, wrapped in the words of sagas, and in the quiet imaginings of those who try to picture them. The great circles of spectators have long since scattered. The warriors and wrestlers, the chess masters and stone lifters, are dust beneath the moss and the sea winds. Yet in some quiet way, they have never left. Their spirit drifts with the gulls over the fjords, hums faintly in the crackle of a fire on a winter's night, and lives on in every contest where courage matters as much as victory. We are left, not only with the rules of the games they played, but with the deeper understanding of why they played them, because to live was to test oneself, to meet the gaze of both friend and foe without flinching, and to carve one's name, however briefly, into the story of the world. So let the story rest here, as the night deepens and the northern stars turn slowly overhead. The games are over, the fields are empty, and the only sound now is the soft breath of the wind over the grass, carrying with it the faintest whisper of a crowd that once roared for blood, for skill, for honor, and for the timeless joy of the game.